Eve Campbell grew up in a house that was never quiet, with 5 siblings, aunts and uncles dropping by unannounced, and grandparents who insisted on celebrating even the smallest victories. There was always something to prepare for. Birthdays turned into block parties, holidays stretched over entire weekends, and even casual Sunday dinners could feel like a banquet. From the time she was old enough to help set the table, Eve found herself naturally taking charge of the chaos. While her cousins argued over music choices or who would run to the store for extra ice, she calmly created lists, assigned tasks, and made sure everything came together seamlessly. At first, it was just a child's eagerness to be helpful, but by the time she was 10, Eve had discovered something more. It thrilled her to see people laughing, connecting, and enjoying a space she had orchestrated. Her parents noticed. Instead of discouraging her from working too hard, they nurtured her budding passion. Her father joked that she had inherited his knack for logistics and her mother's eye for beauty. When Eve mentioned she wanted to pursue event planning seriously, the entire Campbell family backed her without hesitation. At 16, while her peers were just starting to think about college applications, Eve was already enrolled in online hospitality management courses. Nights were spent at her desk, balancing homework assignments with diagrams of banquet layouts and case studies of luxury weddings. By 18, she had moved into business courses, sharpening her understanding of finance, contracts, and negotiation. Eve wasn't just dreaming, she was building. When she turned 21, her effort and focus paid off. While others in her age group planned 21st birthday parties, Eve was orchestrating corporate galas and charity events worth thousands of dollars. Her name was beginning to circulate in professional networks. Clients marveled at her poise, precision, and ability to stay calm when everything seemed on the verge of unraveling. It was at one such networking conference, a grand affair with chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the city's most ambitious minds, that Eve met Dylan Quinn. He wasn't just another guest on the roster. Dylan was already a rising name in the hospitality industry, known for turning his grandfather's modest hotel into a thriving chain. At 27, he had multiplied his inheritance into millions, and his reputation as a visionary mogul preceded him. Eve, clipboard in hand and headset at the ready, didn't expect their worlds to collide that night, but fate had other plans. The ballroom hummed with the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the smooth notes of a jazz quartet tucked in the corner. Eve moved through it all with practiced ease, her clipboard tucked against her chest as if it were an extension of herself. Every detail of the evening, timing, lighting, even the positioning of the dessert trays, had been orchestrated by her hand. She paused at the edge of the room, scanning the crowd. That was when she noticed him. Dylan Quinn stood near the bar, tall and composed, his tailored navy suit catching the light just so. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of making decisions that shaped more than just his own future. People around him leaned in eagerly, laughing at his remarks, but Dylan seemed detached, his gaze drifting over the room as though evaluating it. Eve recognized that look instantly. It was the same way she appraised a venue before an event began, noting every strength and flaw. Curiosity piqued, she stepped closer. "Everything meeting your standards?" she asked lightly when she reached him, her tone playful but professional. Dylan turned, and his eyes locked onto hers, sharp, assessing, but not unkind. For a moment he said nothing, as though he were weighing how much to reveal. Then with the faintest smile he replied, "I was just admiring how seamlessly everything seems to flow." "You must be the one responsible." Eve felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her composure. "I'll take that as a compliment. Though I assure you, it's not as effortless as it looks." "Good work rarely is," Dylan said, his voice smooth. He extended a hand. "Dylan Quinn." She took it, noting the firm grip, the deliberate confidence behind it. "Eve Campbell." Event planner. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I've heard your name. You're the one who managed the Turner Foundation Gala last spring, aren't you?" Her eyebrows lifted. "You keep track of event planners?" "I keep track of excellence," Dylan countered, his gaze steady. The air between them shifted. What began as a polite exchange deepened into something else. Eve felt the weight of his attention, not just as a hotel mogul evaluating talent, but as a man genuinely intrigued. She found herself returning his look, equally curious. It was supposed to be just another networking night, but for Eve and Dylan, it was the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. A few days after the conference, Eve was called into her boss's office. She entered cautiously, clipboard in hand as always, only to be greeted by a wide smile. "Eve, you outdid yourself at the conference," her boss said, motioning for her to sit. Everything ran seamlessly. The board noticed, and so did some important clients. "I'm proud of you," Eve exhaled, the praise warming her chest. Before she could respond, her boss leaned forward. "There's an opening at our downtown branch. They want you to step in as lead coordinator. It comes with a raise and more exposure." Think about it. Her heart leapt, but then faltered just as quickly. It was everything she had worked toward. Yet the thought of leaving her close-knit family tugged at her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'd like some time to decide." Later that afternoon, while scrolling through her emails, one subject line stopped her cold. "Meeting request. Dylan Quinn. Hotel 2 p.m. By the time Eve arrived, precise and punctual, Dylan was ready. He wasted no time. "I want to host a private rooftop party at my hotel," he explained. His tone was professional, but his eyes carried the same intensity she remembered from the conference. Something intimate, romantic, down to the last detail. They took the elevator to the top floor, stepping out into the open air where the city stretched before them. For an hour, they walked the rooftop, bouncing ideas back and forth. Dylan described the mood he envisioned. Soft lights, a private dining area, live music faint but present. Eve, notebook in hand, sketched layouts and jotted notes with sharp precision. Finally, she looked up at him, confident. "I'll send you an email with a full proposal by tomorrow." Dylan's smile was faint but genuine. "I look forward to it." The evening of Dylan Quinn's private party, Eve moved quietly across the rooftop, her eyes scanning every corner. The string lights glowed in warm gold, reflecting against polished wine glasses. The low hum of a violinist tuning nearby floated in the air. Candles flickered along the edges of the tables, their flames dancing with the soft breeze. It was exactly how she had imagined it, and better. Satisfied, she gave the space one final look before slipping toward the stairwell. Event planners, she believed, belonged in the background. This was his evening, not hers. "Don't go just yet." Dylan's voice stopped her. She turned, startled to find him already there, dressed in a dark suit that made his eyes stand out under the lights. He looked around approvingly, then back at her. "It's perfect, Eve. You've exceeded my expectations." Relief washed over her, but before she could respond, he gestured toward one of the set tables. "Sit with me. We need to talk." Confused, Eve hesitated, but finally took a seat. A waitress appeared almost instantly, placing 2 glasses of wine in front of them. Eve's brows knit together. "I thought this was your private dinner." Dylan leaned back, swirling his glass. "It is, but it's also something more." "An interview?" Her lips parted. "An interview?" "Yes," he said smoothly. "I'm planning to expand my hotels to offer full-service luxury events. I need someone who not only has the skill, but the passion. Someone like you." His words carried weight, deliberate and certain. "I'm offering twice your current salary, housing here at the hotel, and in 1 year, partnership shares." Eve's mind spun. It was everything she had dreamed of, more than she had ever dared to imagine. Yet she couldn't stop herself from blurting out, "Why didn't you just ask me outright about the job?" "Why the party?" Dylan's mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. "Because I also wanted a date with you." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You deserve to sit here and enjoy your own creativity, with good food and wine. Not just manage it from the shadows." Eve blinked, then laughed softly, the tension breaking. "You're mixing business and pleasure, Mr. Quinn." "Maybe," he admitted, raising his glass. "But life's too short to separate the two when the right person comes along." Their laughter mingled with the soft violin in the background, the rooftop suddenly feeling less like a workplace and more like the start of something unexpected. The Campbells never did quiet dinners. Eve's announcement about her promotion and Dylan's lucrative offer was met with clapping, cheering, and a chorus of overlapping questions. Her siblings teased her about moving into a fancy hotel suite. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with pride, and her grandmother kept insisting this was only the beginning. But when the noise settled, her father leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Eve, if you're that talented, why not establish your own company?" The words sank into the room, silencing even the most excitable sibling. Eve tilted her head. "My own company?" "Yes," he said firmly. "These people see your worth, but why give them what you can build for yourself? You've been running events since you were a teenager. You've studied, hustled, and sacrificed. You don't need anyone else's name to prove your brilliance." Eve stared at him, her heart racing. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about it before, but hearing her father say it aloud gave it weight, gave it permission. Slowly she nodded. "You're right, Dad, I should be my own boss." The family erupted again, this time with even louder encouragement. Her sisters offered to help with marketing. Her brothers volunteered to lift equipment, and her mother promised to make endless pots of coffee for late nights. The very next morning, Eve got to work. By the time Monday arrived, she had declined her company's promotion and submitted her notice. That evening, she met Dylan at the hotel rooftop to give him her decision. "Thank you for the offer," she told him, meeting his eyes. "But I've decided to start my own business. I want to build something that's mine." For a moment, Dylan simply studied her, then a slow smile tugged at his lips. "Bold. I like that." A week later, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Dylan's voice was warm on the other end. "Eve, how about dinner again? No business talk this time. Just you and me." Her lips curved upward as she leaned back in her chair. "I'd like that." She ended the call with a flutter in her chest. The next year unfolded like a whirlwind for Eve. Her company, Campbell Events, grew from a daring idea into a sought-after brand. What began with small galas and weddings quickly turned into high-end contracts, her reputation for elegance and precision spreading by word of mouth. Each month brought new challenges, but also new victories, and Eve reveled in the thrill of seeing her name on every successful event. Through it all, Dylan was by her side. Their relationship blossomed quietly but steadily, balancing long hours of work with laughter-filled evenings. They learned each other's rhythms, Eve's tendency to sketch ideas on napkins during dinner, Dylan's habit of running hotel numbers at midnight, both of them comfortable sharing dreams as easily as they shared meals. One cool spring evening, Dylan invited her to dinner, insisting she dress elegantly. When the elevator doors opened to the rooftop of his flagship hotel, Eve froze. The space was transformed again. Candles lined the pathway, soft music drifted on the breeze, and the skyline glowed like a sea of stars. Dylan was waiting, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you remember our first meeting here?" he asked, his voice low but certain. Eve's chest tightened. "Of course I do." He stepped closer, producing a small velvet box. "That was the night I realized I wanted you in my world, not just as a planner, not just as a partner in business, but as the woman I'll walk through every rooftop, every city, every dream with." He dropped to one knee. "Eve Campbell, will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, and with a trembling laugh she whispered, "Yes." The wedding was a dazzling affair, blending her eye for detail with his grand sense of scale. Afterward, they spent 2 weeks touring Dylan's hotels across the country, dreaming aloud about merging her events expertise into his empire. By the time they returned, the future was clear. Together, they weren't just Eve Campbell and Dylan Quinn. They were a force. Her creativity and his vision fused seamlessly, turning them into the power couple everyone watched, admired, and envied. For Eve, it was more than love or success. It was the life she had always imagined, standing beside the man who believed in her brilliance as much as she believed in her own. For 7 years, Eve and Dylan had been the couple everyone admired. Their names appeared in business journals, their photos graced glossy magazines, and their joint ventures continued to set the standard for luxury hospitality. Outwardly, everything was perfect. Eve's event empire now seamlessly intertwined with Dylan's hotels, their influence stretching across cities. But behind the polished facade, Eve felt a shift. It began subtly. Dylan's phone, once left casually on the counter, was now always turned face down. Text messages arrived late at night, pulling the faintest smile from him before he slid the device back into his pocket. Last-minute urgent business trips appeared on his schedule, the explanations vague. His kisses grew quick, routine. A brush on the cheek instead of the lingering warmth she once knew. Eve noticed it all. She always noticed. Reading people was her craft, her livelihood. She could sense hesitation in a client's handshake, hear unease in the tone of a vendor's voice, spot tension in the posture of a guest across a ballroom. And now she was reading her husband. Her heart tightened with each passing week. She had seen too many women in her industry blindsided, caught unaware when the truth of an affair shattered their carefully built lives. Eve had promised herself long ago that she would never be one of them. One evening, while reviewing contracts in her office, she caught herself staring at her wedding ring. Memories flooded back. Dylan's rooftop proposal, their honeymoon travels, his unshakable belief in her when she first stepped out on her own. It was those memories that made the present sting even more. Eve didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she watched. She studied his expressions, his absences, the way his laughter no longer reached his eyes when he returned from trips. Every detail, every inconsistency she filed away. If there was something hidden, Eve Campbell would uncover it. She had built her career on seeing the truth behind the presentation, on exposing what others missed. And she wasn't about to let her own marriage unravel without knowing exactly what stood in the shadows. The game had changed, and Eve was determined not to be a victim. It had only been 2 weeks since Dylan started pulling away, but Eve knew better than to think this was new. Affairs didn't bloom overnight. They simmered quietly until they took root. If Dylan's behavior had shifted so quickly, it only meant the attraction had begun months earlier, maybe longer. What Dylan seemed to forget or underestimate was that Eve had full access to everything. Their accounts, his email logins, even the safe in his office. Years ago, he had handed over passwords casually, trusting her with the details of their empire. Trust was supposed to be the bedrock of their marriage. Ironically, that trust would now be his undoing. The secondary phone was his mistake. He rarely used it, and perhaps he thought she'd never think to check. But when another emergency meeting took him away until late, Eve opened the drawer where it sat. The screen lit up easily under her touch, and within minutes the truth unfolded. Messages. Dozens of them. Words filled with endearments that were once hers, now sent to someone else. Promises of stolen moments, secret trips, and declarations that sliced through her heart with surgical precision. Eve's hands trembled as she scrolled, but her face remained calm. She copied everything, emails, photos, messages, backing it up meticulously. Then she placed the phone back exactly where she found it, as though it had never been touched. The next morning, Eve made a call to the top divorce lawyer in the state. Their reputation was ruthless, their track record flawless. She explained enough to secure their interest, promising more evidence would follow. Over the next 3 months, Eve played her role flawlessly. To Dylan, she was still the perfect wife. Warm smile, supportive partner, gracious hostess at every public event. She kissed his cheek, asked about his trips, and laughed at dinner parties. No one would have guessed the truth simmering beneath her composed exterior. But behind closed doors, she was planning his downfall. Every asset, every contract, every share of their combined empire was carefully reviewed. She wasn't just preparing for a divorce. She was preparing to ensure Dylan would never see it coming, and that when it did, he would lose far more than her trust. Eve Campbell had spent her life building success from chaos. Now she was about to do the same with the end of her marriage. Eve sat across from her attorney, the quiet hum of the city outside muffled by the heavy glass windows of the law office. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with decades of courtroom victories behind her, flipped through the thick file Eve had prepared. Bank statements, hotel receipts, flight records, and most damning of all, the text messages pulled from Dylan's secondary phone. "You've done half my job for me," the lawyer said with a wry smile, tapping the stack. "You're meticulous. I almost feel sorry for him." "Don't," Eve replied coolly. He knew exactly what he was doing. Together, they crafted a plan. Every week, Eve met with her lawyer under the guise of business lunches. They mapped out the empire she and Dylan had built, identifying what was hers, what could be contested, and where Dylan was most vulnerable. His hotel expansions relied on investor confidence. Any hint of scandal could cause ripples. Eve didn't want public chaos, not yet, but she wanted him to know she held the power to unravel everything if he tried to challenge her. At home, she remained the picture of grace. She smiled for photographs, hosted clients, and even accompanied Dylan to charity dinners. If he noticed anything different, he didn't say. In his mind, Eve was still the steady wife standing behind him. In reality, she was building the exit strategy of a lifetime. She began moving her own assets quietly, shifting funds into protected accounts her lawyer had advised. She updated her business contracts to ensure Campbell Events was shielded from any potential entanglement with Dylan's hotels. She even reached out to select allies in the industry, planting seeds of independence, casually hinting that big changes might be on the horizon. At night, when Dylan was working late, Eve studied case law and divorce precedents, guided by her lawyer's notes. Knowledge became her armor. Control was her weapon. 3 months in, the blueprint was complete. All that remained was timing. Eve knew Dylan's next major investor event was only weeks away, an evening where his reputation needed to shine. It would also be the moment she chose to turn the tables. The wife he thought would never leave was about to become his fiercest adversary. Eve had always believed in looking at the full picture, and this time was no different. If Dylan thought she would only trace his footsteps, he underestimated her. Quietly, she turned her attention to the woman who had caught his eye. Her name was Cassandra, beautiful, polished, and charming. On the surface, she seemed like another socialite drawn to Dylan's influence. But with a little digging, Eve uncovered the twist. Cassandra was the daughter of one of Dylan's top investors. The connection explained why Dylan was so careful, why his smiles were faint and his excuses crafted. But the deeper Eve dug, the sharper the betrayal cut. Cassandra wasn't just single and reckless. She was married. Her husband, Jordan Swift, was no ordinary man. He was a powerful real estate mogul, his empire stretching across continents. For the past 6 months, Jordan had been overseas managing new developments, flying home only on brief weekends. Cassandra had filled the gaps in his absence with Dylan. Eve wasted no time. She arranged a meeting with Jordan, presenting it under the guise of business. When he arrived, he greeted her warmly, expecting a proposal for a new joint venture. But as soon as Eve slid the envelope of photographs across the table, his expression hardened. He studied the images silently, his wife entwined with Dylan in hotel lobbies, late-night dinners, and intimate embraces that left no room for misinterpretation. Finally, Jordan looked up, his jaw tight. "What's your plan?" Eve's eyes were cold, steady. "Next month, Dylan and I are hosting a large event at our flagship hotel. Every investor, every industry leader will be there. I intend to give my husband a very special gift that evening, the truth, wrapped in front of everyone he values most." Jordan leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable at first. Then a slow, deliberate smile spread across his lips. "Then send me everything you have on my wife. Because when that night comes, I'll have a gift for Cassandra as well." For the first time in months, Eve felt the weight of betrayal ease, replaced by the sharp clarity of strategy. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The stage was set. The players were gathering, and soon the world would see Dylan Quinn and Cassandra Swift for who they truly were. In the weeks leading up to the flagship event, Eve and Jordan met in carefully chosen locations, private lounges, out-of-the-way cafes, even once at one of his half-finished developments where no one would think to look. Each time, their conversation was sharp, deliberate, leaving no detail unplanned. Jordan was a man accustomed to negotiation, his tone clipped and businesslike as he reviewed the evidence Eve had gathered. "Your husband is arrogant," he said one evening, flipping through screenshots on his tablet. "He thinks no one will question him because of who he is. Cassandra has that same arrogance. They're perfect for each other in all the worst ways." Eve's lips pressed into a thin smile. "And it will be their downfall." Together, they orchestrated the timing. The flagship gala was more than just a party. It was the unveiling of Dylan's latest hotel expansion, a night designed to woo investors and cement his reputation as a visionary in hospitality. Cassandra, of course, would attend as her father's guest. The irony wasn't lost on either Eve or Jordan. "The room will be full of their biggest allies," Eve said, sliding a floor plan of the ballroom across the table, "which makes it the perfect stage. I'll present Dylan with his gift after his speech." Jordan leaned back thoughtful. "And I'll handle Cassandra. No theatrics, just precision. When I expose her, it will be undeniable. She'll have nowhere to run." There was a moment of silence between them, heavy with shared purpose. Though they had different motives, Eve to reclaim her life and legacy, Jordan to protect his name and empire, they both understood the stakes. "Are you ready for the fallout?" Jordan asked finally. "Because once this happens, there's no undoing it." Eve's gaze was steady, her voice firm. "I've been preparing for months. This isn't about revenge. It's about control. He took our marriage and made it a lie. Now I'm taking back the narrative." Jordan nodded once, a gesture of respect. "Then we're aligned." As they stood to leave, Eve felt the weight of the plan settle into place. The final act was near. Soon, the rooftop where Dylan once promised her forever would be replaced by a ballroom where she promised him the truth. And this time, it would not be whispered in private. It would be unveiled for the entire world to see. To Dylan, life appeared as smooth as ever. He walked through boardrooms with his usual confidence, charmed investors with practiced ease, and came home to Eve with quick smiles and routine kisses. If he noticed the quiet watchfulness in her eyes, he didn't show it. The gala was only 2 weeks away, and Dylan was consumed with preparations. To him, it was the pinnacle of his career, a night that would secure his place as one of the most powerful hoteliers in the country. Investors from around the globe had confirmed, media coverage was promised, and every detail was crafted to elevate his brand. In his mind, it would be his triumph, and Cassandra would be there. She was reckless now, emboldened by Dylan's attention. They no longer bothered with cryptic messages. Instead, their exchanges were bolder, their meetings riskier. Cassandra sent selfies from hotel suites, whispered endearments across dinner tables, and slipped into his arms as though the world wasn't watching. Her arrogance mirrored Dylan's. She believed her husband was too distracted with overseas projects to notice, too far away to care. What she didn't know was that Jordan had already seen every message, every photo. Meanwhile, Eve played her role to perfection. She attended planning meetings with Dylan, nodding along as he discussed the investor list. She helped select wines, approved floral arrangements, and even offered to oversee final rehearsals for the evening. To Dylan, she was still his flawless partner, making sure his moment of glory would shine. But behind closed doors, she and Jordan refined their strategy. Phone calls late at night confirmed the timing, exchanged files, and checked contingency plans. Jordan's tone was clipped but steady, his resolve hardening with each piece of evidence. "The irony," Jordan said during one call, "is that they think they're clever. They don't even realize the trap is already set." Eve's voice was calm, almost cold. "Let them enjoy these last days of pretending. After the gala, they won't be able to hide behind illusions anymore." As the final week approached, the contrast was stark. Dylan and Cassandra, intoxicated by their affair, carried on with careless indulgence. Even Jordan, silent and deliberate, sharpened their weapons. The stage was nearly ready, and soon the calm would shatter into chaos. The flagship hotel's grand ballroom shimmered with light. Crystal chandeliers glistened overhead, while champagne flowed freely into crystal flutes. This was the night Dylan Quinn had been waiting for, the culmination of years of ambition, expansion, and vision. Guests filled the tables, investors, dignitaries, industry leaders. Cameras clicked softly as servers glided between the guests with practiced grace. At the center of it all, Campbell Quinn moved like a queen, dressed in a gown of midnight silk, her posture elegant, her smile radiant. She looked every bit the supportive wife, the flawless hostess. No one would have guessed that beneath her calm exterior, she held the threads of a storm, about to unravel everything. When the time came, Eve rose from her seat and stepped onto the stage. The room quieted immediately, anticipation hanging in the air. Dylan leaned back, smug with pride, expecting his wife to extol his brilliance. Eve began softly, her voice measured but warm. Tonight is more than just a celebration of expansion. It is also a celebration of partnership. When I met Dylan, I was just a young woman with a vision, and he was a hotelier with ambition. We fell in love on rooftops, built dreams together, and created not only a marriage but a legacy. The audience smiled, charmed by her words. Dylan placed a hand on her back as she leaned near, and when she turned, he brushed a kiss against her cheek. Cameras flashed, capturing what looked like a tender, supportive moment. Then Eve straightened, her expression unreadable. But what makes this night even more special is that I had a surprise partner working with me in secret, someone who has been essential in planning a bold new direction for this company. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming real estate mogul Jordan Swift. The crowd erupted into applause. Jordan stepped forward with the effortless authority of a man used to commanding rooms. He lifted a hand in greeting, his smile practiced but sharp. Eve's lips curved wider as she glanced at Dylan, who sat frozen, the color draining from his face. Behind every great man, Jordan said smoothly, is often a great woman. So please give my wife Cassandra a warm round of applause. The room thundered again. Eve tilted her head, her eyes never leaving Dylan's. "Oh," she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the microphone. "I've yet to meet her properly. Jordan, would you do us the honor of introducing us?" Jordan turned and gestured toward the back of the room. Cassandra, pale and trembling, rose slowly to her feet. Murmurs coursed through the crowd as she made her way to the podium. Her hands shook as Jordan leaned down and kissed her on the cheek before wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The room was thick with anticipation. Jordan cleared his throat. "Before I share what Eve and I have been working on, let me first tell you a little about my company and the direction we're heading." He spoke with the steady cadence of a seasoned executive, describing new ventures in real estate development, his plans for innovative hospitality collaborations, and the strength of aligned partnerships. Guests nodded, impressed, some scribbling notes. Dylan sat rigid, barely breathing, Cassandra clutching her hands together at her side. Then the lights dimmed. A slideshow appeared on the massive screen behind the podium. At first, it was a beautiful tribute, images of Dylan and Eve on their wedding day, smiling broadly, their hands intertwined. Photos of them working side by side, laughing over plans, greeting staff, embodying the partnership Eve had just described. The audience clapped, charmed by the display of unity and legacy. But then the images shifted. The first photo was subtle. Dylan and Cassandra seated closely together in a quiet restaurant, his hand brushing hers. Gasps filled the room. The next reel was undeniable. Dylan and Cassandra kissing in a hotel lobby. Cassandra holding his hand as they strolled barefoot along a beach. The two of them slipping into hotel rooms together, their smiles intimate, their bodies entwined in ways no business relationship could excuse. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Guests turned to each other, eyes wide, whispers sharp and urgent. Cameras clicked in disbelief, some flashing toward Dylan as if to capture his reaction. Dylan's face flushed a violent red, his jaw clenching so tightly his temples throbbed, fury radiating from him. Cassandra stood frozen at the podium, her face pale, shame etched into every line. Eve remained serene, her smile calm and unwavering as she stood just behind them. letting the truth settle into the air like a storm cloud. For once, Dylan Quinn had no words, no charm, no excuses to save him. The empire they had built together had just shifted, and the world had seen who he truly was. For a long moment after the last photo faded from the screen, the ballroom was silent, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any outburst. Forks rested untouched, champagne bubbles rose and popped unheard. Every guest sat suspended between disbelief and curiosity, all eyes fixed on Dylan Quinn. Then came the murmurs. Sharp, hurried whispers rippled across the tables. Is this real? That's Cassandra. And her husband? How long has this been going on? A few investors exchanged pointed glances, already calculating what Dylan's scandal meant for their money. Others shook their heads, muttering about betrayal and arrogance. Phones appeared discreetly. Photos snapped of Dylan's stony face, of Cassandra's trembling hands. The event that was meant to secure Dylan's legacy had just unraveled in front of everyone who mattered. Dylan stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. His jaw was rigid, his voice like steel. "This is slander," he barked, his eyes darting between Jordan and Eve. "Fabricated lies meant to humiliate me." But the evidence on the screen spoke louder than his denial. The photographs hadn't been staged. The messages weren't forged. They carried the raw intimacy of truth. Cassandra tried to retreat from the podium, her heels clicking too quickly across the stage. But Jordan caught her arm. His grip wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to keep her in place. "You always did love the spotlight, my dear," he said into the microphone, his tone cold and cutting. "Now you have it." Gasps filled the room as Cassandra's eyes brimmed with tears. Eve, standing gracefully at the side, finally stepped forward. Her voice was steady, smooth, like she was addressing a client rather than a crumbling marriage. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. My husband and I have clearly reached the end of our partnership, both personal and professional. Campbell Events will continue independently, stronger than ever. To our investors, your loyalty will not be wasted." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling as her poise commanded the room. Some guests even rose to their feet, impressed by her composure in the face of betrayal. Dylan stood frozen, his empire slipping through his fingers while Eve smiled, dignified and untouchable. Dylan stormed out, Cassandra trailing behind him like a shadow unraveling under the lights. Jordan escorted Eve from the stage, both of them triumphant in their own quiet way. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Power couple no more, Dylan Quinn. Exposed at flagship Gala. Affair with investor's daughter shakes Quinn hotels. Eve Campbell Quinn walks away with dignity and control. Paparazzi crowded the hotel entrance, cameras flashing as Dylan barked at staff, trying in vain to block questions. Investors called frantically, some demanding explanations, others quietly withdrawing their support. Stock dipped as whispers of instability spread through the market. Meanwhile, Eve's phone rang with opportunity. Former partners and new clients alike praised her professionalism, her strength. "If you can survive that with grace," one potential investor told her, "there's nothing you can't handle." Campbell Events trended across social media, not as a victim's company, but as the brand of a woman who refused to be humiliated. Eve sat in her office, coffee in hand, watching the news with calm satisfaction. She had prepared for this moment for months, and now the world was catching up to the truth she already knew. Her marriage had ended on a grand stage, but her future, her empire, was just beginning. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains of Dylan Quinn's penthouse suite. He sat at the dining table, nursing a black coffee, his head pounding from the chaos of the night before. The headlines had already reached him, and the sting of betrayal and humiliation gnawed at his pride. When the doorman buzzed to announce a delivery, Dylan waved impatiently. A hotel staffer brought up a sleek envelope and set it beside his cup. Dylan, still groggy, tore it open without much thought. His stomach dropped. Petition for divorce. Campbell versus Quinn. For a moment, The room spun. His fingers tightened around the papers as he skimmed the words, each line colder than the last. Grounds of infidelity, supporting evidence filed, asset division outlined with ruthless precision. Eve had planned this. She hadn't simply exposed him, she dismantled him. His first instinct was fury. He slammed the papers down and grabbed his phone, punching in his lawyer's number. "I just got served," Dylan barked when the line connected. "Fix it. Make it go away." On the other end, his attorney's sigh was heavy, reluctant. "Dylan, we've already received copies. The evidence is overwhelming. The board has been notified, and I need to be honest, it doesn't look good. Not legally, not financially, not publicly. What are you talking about?" Dylan demanded, his voice cracking. "The board called an emergency meeting at dawn. They voted to freeze your accounts pending a full audit. Effective immediately. You're suspended from your position. They're concerned about investor confidence and financial stability." Dylan felt the air leave his lungs. "They can't do that." "This is my company. It was your company," the lawyer said gently but firmly. "Now it's the board's to protect. Eve's reputation has only risen from this. Yours, however." He let the silence speak for itself. Dylan stared at the cold coffee in front of him, his empire slipping through his fingers faster than he could grasp. Everything he had built, every ounce of control he once wielded, was unraveling piece by piece, and Eve had orchestrated it all with a smile. For the first time in years, Dylan Quinn felt powerless. While Dylan's world crumbled, Eve Campbell's star only burned brighter. In the days after the gala, she became a symbol of composure and strength. News outlets praised the way she handled the scandal with dignity. Eve had never sought sympathy. Instead, she offered vision. In interviews, she spoke not of betrayal, but of opportunity. How disruption could be harnessed for reinvention, how integrity was the foundation of any lasting legacy. Every word was intentional, every appearance polished. The narrative was no longer about Dylan's affair. It was about Eve's resilience. Her family, as always, stood firmly by her side. Her father beamed with pride, reminding her of the night he told her she should be her own boss. "See," he said, hugging her tightly, "you've built something no one can take away from you." Eve also found an unexpected ally in Jordan Swift. Though their alliance had been born of mutual betrayal, respect blossomed from their shared experience. At industry functions, they occasionally appeared side by side, two powerhouses who had not only survived humiliation, but turned it into dominance. Whispers followed them, but Eve paid no mind. Her focus was singular. Her company, her clients, her future. One evening, standing in her new office overlooking the city skyline, Eve allowed herself a rare pause. The lights below sparkled, like the chandeliers she'd spent years arranging for others. But this time the stage was hers. She wasn't someone's wife, someone's support, someone's background. She was the architect of her own empire, and she knew the world was watching. Jordan and Cassandra's divorce was nothing short of explosive. Courtrooms were filled with whispers of betrayal. The press swarmed every filing, and headlines turned their private war into public entertainment. Cassandra had fought fiercely, leaning on her father's influence to demand more than Jordan was willing to give. In the end, she walked away with a settlement that was generous by most standards, but not nearly enough to maintain the lavish lifestyle she had flaunted for years. Her circle of friends dwindled, many turning their backs in favor of preserving ties with Jordan. Gossip labeled her not only as unfaithful, but as reckless, and soon even charity boards and social clubs distanced themselves. Humiliated, Cassandra moved back into her parents' estate, where she rarely left the grounds. Eventually, unable to withstand the whispers, she relocated overseas, living in quiet exile. Months passed. Eve, meanwhile, flourished. Her company expanded internationally, her brand now synonymous with strength and elegance. Though Dylan's empire struggled under board audits and investor doubts, Eve refused to gloat. She poured herself into her work, into her clients, into shaping a future that was entirely her own. Then one quiet afternoon, Dylan walked into her office. Eve looked up from her desk, startled but composed. Time had not been kind to him. His suit hung looser, his eyes carried shadows, his confidence dulled. He stood for a long moment, then finally spoke. "I came to apologize," he said softly. "For everything, for cheating, for betraying you, for letting arrogance blind me. Cassandra was a mistake. I allowed my pride to control me." Eve's gaze was steady, but her voice carried the steel of someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes. "Why, Dylan? Or did she steal you from me?" He faltered, shame flickering across his face. "She needed me, or so I thought. Her husband was gone, she was lonely, and I convinced myself I was the answer. And you!" His eyes lifted to hers. "You were so independent. I thought you didn't need me." Eve's throat tightened, but she did not let the emotion show. "You were wrong. Every time we weren't together, I missed you. I needed you, Dylan, but you chose not to see that." His voice cracked. "I still love you." "I never stopped." She inhaled deeply, her heart aching at the familiarity in his eyes, the memory of the man she once adored. But the wound was too deep, the trust too broken. "I know," she said gently. "But it's not strong enough. Not strong enough to love just me." Dylan's shoulders sagged. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything lost. Finally he asked, almost pleading, "How can I make this right?" Eve's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Be a better man. For the next woman. Don't let her wonder if she's enough. Don't let her feel unseen," he nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll try." Then, without another word, Dylan turned and walked out, leaving Eve alone in her office. Eve exhaled slowly, a single tear slipping free before she brushed it away. Closure wasn't painless, but it was powerful. The end. Thank you for listening to Green Tea Tales. Help support our channel with like, share, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.